All right, Shabbos, good morning, good morning. Let us begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning shir, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Elul, to thank Shandi and Avram Kelman for dedicating all of the shiurim and drushos this month in honor of Yechiel's engagements to Alana Falik and in memory of their parents, Drom and Bernice Kelman and Alexander and Frederica David, Zichronim Livracha. To thank Barak, Maya, Sandy Hoffman, Dora Limas, and Avi Malamed for dedicating all the shiurim and drushos this month in memory of Ruvain ben Emmanuel, Zichronim Livracha. To thank Ayala and Sarah Steinberg for dedicating all the shiurim and drushos this month in the Schus of Rafu Shalima for Shulamis Bas Susha and the merit Hashem and the merit of her continued health. Daf Yomi shir, dedicating the shiurim and drushos this month in the Schus of Rafu Shalima for Yehuda ben Michal. And our Daf Yomi shir sponsors for today, Hirsch and Victor Goldberg and families, information of the yahrzeit of their father, Herman Goldberg, Chaim ben Shlomo Halevi, Zichrona Livracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshamas will have an aliyah, the families in Nechama, and all those who require a refuah, should Meretz Hashem have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. So we have a lot to do today, an incredible daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Kesuvos, Maseches Kesuvos. Daf Samech Daled, page 64. We are picking up on Samech Gimel Amud Beis 63b, and we left off. We have a lot to do, but we'll catch up today. We have a lot to do. 3 lines up from where it gets wide. 3 lines up where it gets wide. So just to reorient ourselves a little bit, if you remember again in yesterday's daf, we left off with the Mishnah, where the Mishnah introduced us to the concept of a moredes. Now remember again, there's a moredes and a mored, which is when one spouse rebels against the other. So after we were introduced to this Mishnah, we spent the time yesterday trying to figure out moredes, about what rebelling against what, or better stated, rebelling with what, right? So remember again, the conclusion of the Gemara was that it is clear that if a wife refuses to be intimate with her husband as a tool of revenge, right? And we're going to qualify that today. In other words, as a way just to go ahead and make him miserable, that's called moredes. By then, of course, the same thing applies from a man, from a husband to a wife. And again, at that point in time, the Mishnah said if she does that, what we do is we diminish her ksuva incrementally. It was machlukis in the Mishnah by how much, but essentially a certain amount each and every week. Husband, if the husband is the mored, will increase her ksuva by an incremental amount each and every week. The machlokes that the Gemara spoke about was, well, what happens if she's mored b'malacha? She says, I'm not going to work, right? Again, we point out in the last Mishnah there are certain responsibilities that a woman has, or again, we'll point out already in this sugya that halacha l'maaseh there's a certain amount of income that that we expect, that Chazal expected the wife to bring into the home. Let's say she rebels against that. So that was the point of machlokes. We were then introduced to the position of the Rabboseinu, the rabbis, right? And what did the Rabbanan say? The Rabbanan say, no, we don't do this incremental diminution of the ksuva. Instead, what this whole thing is a 4-week process. And what do we do in the 4-week process? We announce about the way, I just want to point out, I'm using the case of moredes, the wife who rebels, as just the example, because that's the way the Mishnah framed it. But I just want to be clear. Whatever is applying to the woman is going to apply conversely to the man, right? This is where we're equal opportunity penalizers. Right? So the idea over here is, so the Rabbanan, the Rabboseinu come along and say, no, none of this incremental diminution. Instead, what are we going to do? We have 4 weeks. Over the course of the 4 weeks, we will announce in the Beis Medrash and the Batei Knesios that, Rachel is a moredes against Ruvain. If at the end of the day, during the course of those 4 weeks, we're able to turn this around, fine. If not, if at the end of 4 weeks he divorces her and she loses her ksuva. So I will say, so this is the machlokes, our Mishnah model, which is the incremental diminution, versus the model of Rabboseinu, which is a 4-week. That's it. The entire thing is a 4-week process. So it says the Gemara, Amrei Bar Chama, so pamayim sholchin lami bezdin, achas kodim hachraza, va'achas la'achar hachraza. And Beis Din sends her a message. Now, both remember again, what was the message of Beis Din? We saw this also in yesterday's daf. The message of Beis Din was, listen, you're going to lose your ksuva, right? No matter how much your ksuva is worth, at the end of this is in the Rabboseinu model. In the Rabboseinu model, they say to her, listen, there's a 4-week window to get this resolved. If it's not resolved in 4 weeks, you're going to lose your ksuva, no matter how enormous or how much that ksuva is worth. Darash Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda, halacha k'Rabosenu. So we'll say now we come. Rav Nachman bar Chisda says the halacha is like the Rabosenu, namely that we don't subscribe to the incremental model, rather we go with the 4-week model. Amar Rava, Rava said, "Hi burcha. This is a burcha." Rashi says, "What's a burcha?" It sounds, you could tell from like the word itself, right? Rashi says, "Davar she'eino hagun." It's not correct. It's not correct. So what a burcha, right? So Rava says, "This is a burcha. It's not true." Amar le Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, my burcha say, well, I don't understand, what's the problem? Ana amirta nehila. First of all, I, Rav Nachman, said it. I'm saying it over. Umishmei de gavar rabba amrisa nehila, and I'm saying it over in the name of a great man. Who's the great man and whose name I'm saying this over? Umanu Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Chanina. Right, Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina. So again, Rav Nachman says to Rabbi, what do you mean burcha? I'm telling you, first of all, again, I'm saying it over. I wouldn't say it over if I didn't know it to be true. And I'm saying it over in the name of a great man. What's the problem? What's the problem? Who does Rava hold like? In other words, why did Rava feel that it's a burcha and it's incorrect? So Rava said, because Rav Shishis was of the opinion, and he said that the halacha, how do we deal with the case of moredes? Nimlochin ba. Rava said, nimlochin ba literally means we consult her. But what it actually means, Rashi says over in nimlochin ba, so mashines gita, we delay the giving of the get, umachzirin aleha, shetachsor ba, ubesoch kach pochsen miksuvasa, shiva dinar b'shabbos. Rava said, Rav Shishis said, it's a process. We negotiate with her. We try to figure out what's the issue, what's the problem, is it resolvable? And sometimes that's going to take more than 4 weeks, right? And therefore, again, obviously, in that process, there may be the diminution of the ksuva, but Lamaisa, we do not go ahead and limit the window of conflict resolution over here to 4 weeks. So the Gemara goes back to Rav Huna bar Yehuda Amar Rav Sheshes halacha einim lachin ba. So I say Rav Huna bar Rav Yehuda saying Rav Sheshes, we don't negotiate. In other words, this 4 weeks. This 4 weeks, right? So we say to the wife, and again, I will say, once again, it's to the wife or to the husband, whoever is the morid moredes. We say to the wife, figure it out. You got 4 weeks. We're happy to help you in the span of 4 weeks. But if the problem doesn't get solved in 4 weeks, at the end of the day, you lose your ksuva. I will say, I'll point out something very interesting. If you notice, it's almost as if Chazal are putting forward 2 different models of problem solving, right? One model of problem solving, the Mishnah's model, is slow and incremental. Problems take time. Rabosinu are coming along and they're almost saying it's actually fascinating. They're like, no. If slow and incremental, you could be working on solving your problems your entire life. If you want to be an effective problem solver, put an end date on it. Put an end date on it. Which I will say is such a profound yesod, because sometimes this happens to us in life where there's something I need to take care of, and it just goes on and on and on and on. And something that you just have to do in life is say, task must be completed by. That's it. That's it. 4 weeks. We've got 4 weeks to work on this. Because sometimes, if you know that you have a deadline, if you know if you have a deadline, then Lamaisa, that's the greatest motivator to get the job done. So just interesting. And again, they're both right for different situations. But I think as I get older, I become a greater fan of the Rabosenu model, only because things tend to linger in life, right? And sometimes if you don't say got to get it done by this date, here's where the resolution may be a little bit, in other words, had I had more time, perhaps the resolution would be better. That's possible. But sometimes a resolution of lesser quality more immediately is better than a better resolution after an elongated period of time. It's again, so just interesting models. In any event, the Gemara goes weiter. So we'll say, now the Gemara says, by the way, what's the case of moredes? Now, remember, we've already established that the paradigmatic case the Gemara says about moredes is by tashmish, is by intimacy, right? So the wife is saying to her husband, I refuse to be intimate with you. Obviously, both sides, the Gemara says, so what are the parameters of that? Say, Amra Meimar, da Amra, ba'inalei, here is what I say. The wife says, Rachel says, I want to be married to Ruvain. I just want to make his life miserable. In other words, I want to be married to him. Of course, I love him. He's wonderful. He's great. But I would like to cause him pain. So, in other words, it's not a direct. Hopefully, it's not a direct quote, right? But Lamaisa, what it's saying over here is She doesn't want out of the marriage. She's angry at him. She's upset at him for whatever the reason. I want to stay married, but I'm upset, I'm angry, I'm disappointed, and therefore I'm using intimacy as a tool to go ahead and express my anger and disappointment. So the Gemara says, Aval Amra Ma'is Alai. But if she says, listen, unfortunately, I find my husband repulsive, and that is why I can't be intimate with him. So lo kaifina. I will say in a situation like that, obviously we're not going to compel her. In other words, I will say, so this is very interesting. What case of moredes is when intimacy is used as a tool of revenge, right? Or as a tool of leverage. As a tool of leverage. That Chazal felt that's an unhealthy dynamic in the marriage. So either fix it or dissolve it. Those. But if the wife says, listen, I don't know what to do, I find my husband repulsive. So here, in other words, she's claiming it's an issue of attraction. So, and again, it's more than just attraction. Repulsive is a pretty strong word. So we'll say, by the way, I'll point out, repulsive, the poskim bring down, repulsive doesn't just have to mean physically. Repulsive could also mean that a woman claims she finds her husband's actions, she finds his behaviors off-putting and repulsive. In a case like that, okay, we're not going to chas v'shalom, not going to force a wife to be intimate with her husband if she does not feel that this is something appropriate for her. If it's being used as a tool of revenge, that's where Chazal step in. She has a problem with her husband. Again, I will say the bottom line is, in that case of ma'is alai, that marriage is also going to end in divorce. Right? In other words, that is also an unsustainable model. But lamaisa, we would not go ahead and we would not diminish her ksuva over that. So we'll say the Gemara tells an interesting story. Marzutra Amar Kaifinon. Marzutra said, no, even in the case of ma'is alai, we go ahead and we compel her. Now I will say, to be clear, this is very interesting. Now, kaifinon in this context of forcing. We will say, what does forcing mean in this context? When the Gemara says forcing, what does that mean? What does that mean? Ksuva, right? In other words, diminishing ksuva. So when Marzutra comes along and says over here that no, even if she says ma'is alai, he's repulsive to me, we force her, Marzutra is not suggesting that we diminish her ksuva. What Marzutra is saying is, if she says ma'is alai, we try to work on this. In other words, so kaifinon means the Beis Din will get involved and we'll try to negotiate some type of resolution. We will not diminish her ksuva, but ultimately, again, we're also just not going to let it go. Let's try to figure out that something can be negotiated. So the Gemara tells the story. It's incredible. Hava uvda va'ach be Marzutra. There was once a situation like this that Marzutra was dealing with, and the wife said ma'is alai. She said ma'is alai. And what? And literally again, Marzutra compelled her. And I will say now, once again, when we say Marzutra compelled her, so lemaisa again, that doesn't mean diminution of the ksuva. It means that Marzutra urged her to work on this. He urged her to work on this. And what happened? V'nafak minei Rabbi Chanina misura. And the Gemara says, by the way, she worked on it. She went back to her husband, and they had a son, Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Chanina of Surah. They will say, so there's much to talk about with this, but the Gemara then says, by the way, Velohi, that's actually not a good raya. Hasam siyata dishmaya hava. That whole thing, that was incredible siyata dishmaya. And I will say, it's possible what the Gemara is saying is, there were so many problems in that marriage, that the marriage produced a functional child. Marzutra, you're great, you're not that good, right? You're not that good, right? That marriage produced a functional child. Ultimately, that was nothing short of divine intervention. That was siyata dishmaya. Okay, so we'll say the Gemara tells the story. Kal Seid Rav Zvid Imrida. The daughter-in-law of Rav Zvid, goes without saying that every marriage and every raising of children always requires siyata dishmaya. This is the shlosha shutzfin ba'adam, the Gemara says. There are three partners in the creation of man: Father, Mother, and the Ribbon Shalom. And that's not just in the miracle of conception. That is true in everyday life of a marriage, in everyday life of raising a family. There is dramatic and overwhelming siyata dishmaya every single step of the way. So the Gemara says as follows: Kal Seid Rav Zvid, which, by the way, I'm sorry, just then we're going to go on. Because a marriage and raising a family needs siyata dishmaya, this is why a person has to make sure that they're holding on the appropriate spiritual level. Because if I'm not holding on the appropriate spiritual level, I'm not going to receive the siyata dishmaya. And if I'm not going to receive the siyata dishmaya, my marriage is not going to be good. I'm not going to be an effective parent. And my children, I'm not going to be able to help my children actualize their potential. If I need the siyata d'shmaya, the divine assistance, then I have to be on the level where I am worthy of receiving it. Kal Seid Rav Zavid, Imrida, the daughter-in-law Rav Zavid rebelled against her husband. She rebelled against her husband. Avatfisa Chad Shira, she was holding on to a particular silken piece of clothing. Now Rashi says over here, it's interesting. Rashi frames this, Kal Seid Rav Zavid, Imrida, Va'amrim Ma'is Alai. So people so a lot of them unfortunately have a big problem with Rashi. Rashi, why are you saying Ma'is Alai? The Gemara just said Ma'is Alai is not Moredes. Okay, so let's leave aside that comment of Rashi for now. Let's just take this as a typical case of Moredes, where ultimately the daughter-in-law Rav Zavid said to her husband, I love you, I just want to make your life miserable. Right? Classic case of Moredes. So what happens? Havitafisa Chadshir, Rashi says, Me'il echad shechnisa lo b'ksuva. So she had in her possession one garment. Shir is usually a silken garment. She had in her possession one garment. So what happened? Yasa Ameimar Marzuch Rav Ashi. So Ameimar Marzuch and Rav Ashi were sitting together. V'yasiv Rav Gamda Gabayu. Rav Gamda was sitting with them. So Yasi, they were all sitting together. V'ka Amri. Marda, when a woman rebels. Hefsida. So both say, now remember, here's what we know. When a woman rebels, right, a moredes, assuming there's no resolution, what does she lose? What does she lose? Her ksuva. So remember again, in addition to ksuva, there's also nichsei mulog. Remember again, a woman brought in property to the marriage. Now, when you have, sometimes nichsei mulog is used over the course of the marriage, and the leftover nichsei mulog are called belaos. Belaos literally means worn out items. So in this case, what happened over here is, the wife, Rachel, we'll call the daughter-in-law of the daughter-in-law of Rav Zavid, had in her possession one of these garments. Now this is something she brought in as dowry, became nichsei malog, right? She had in her possession. So the Gemara says as follows. So we ask Marda hifsida b'losef. A woman goes ahead and rebels. Not only does she go ahead and lose her ksuva, but she loses the nichsei malog as well. She loses the blos. So the Gemara says, right, Amar lahu Rav Gamda. Rav Gamda said, come on, Mishum du Rav Zavid gaver Rabba machni fasole. Because Rav Zavid is a great man, you're machni fasol, chanifa, you're flattering. You're flattering him, right? You're kissing up to him, you're flattering him. In other words, I would say, this was Rav Zavid's daughter-in-law who rebelled against Rav Zavid's son. So now Rav Gamda, they're saying, oh, you know what? When a woman rebels, she even loses her belos, even the worn-out clothing that she brought into the marriage. So they said, Rav Gamda, come on, because Rav Zavid, because you're right here, you're flattering him by giving a psak halacha that favors his son. So the Gemara says, Vam Rav Kana, mi boi Rava v'lo pashit. So we'll say, actually, because Rava asked this question, namely, that halacha l'maisa, if they're belos, worn out nichsei mulog, if a woman is a moredes, does she lose that or not? That was a question that was stated by Rava and was not resolved. And you're sitting here saying that, oh, for sure, she loses it. You must just be saying that in order to go ahead and flatter Rav Zavid. Ikadamri, alternate version of this, Yossi v'Kamri, they were sitting together and they said, Marda lo efsida b'losea kayamin, so we'll say alternate version. A woman rebels, she does not lose her belos. If there's existing nichsei mulog that's worn out, she doesn't lose it. Amar lahu Rav Gamda, so Rav Gamda said, Mishum Rav Zavid, sub top of Samach Dalet, Mishum Rav Zavid, Gaver Rabahu, Ach Fisulei. Now, both say in this version, so Rav Gamda said like this. Rav Gamda said, because Rav Zavid is Gavra Rabba. Now, both say, it's incredible. What's the definition of Gavra Rabba, great man? Rashi says, V'lo ya'ar al dvarenu machmas an visanuso. I will say, this is so profound. What's the definition of a Gavra Rabba? Someone who's humble. The definition of greatness is humility. What a profound, I would say, is Kesuvos not the best thing in the world? You literally cannot get past a line in the Gemara without learning something that is going to change your life. A Gavra Rabba, who is a Gavra Rabba? Not someone who mastered Shas, not someone who knows Torah and Poskim, not someone who gives a lot of tzedakah, a lot of chesed. Those are all great things. A true Gavra Rabba, another. Humility. So they say, Rav Gamda said, because Rav Zavid is so humble and he's not going to object to a ruling that is detrimental to his own son, you've turned the din on its head. Because after all, this question was posed to Rava and it was not answered. So therefore I will say, halacha l'mais, we have a very interesting case here. Here's what we know. right? In the case of Moredes, ultimately, again, a woman loses her ksuva. We have two different models of ksuva loss, right? The Mishnah model of gradual diminution, the Rabbeinu model of 4-week window. Okay, so that's machlokes and one. But at the end of the day, everyone's agreeing that the penalty for Moredes is she loses her ksuva. Now Rabbeinu is, okay, fine. What about belows? What about leftover nichse mulug? Does she lose that or not? So Rabbeinu that machlokes. To which the Gemara says it's incredible. Hashta de lo itmar lo hachi v'lo hachi. So Rabbeinu now that we don't really have resolution, so we don't know again, does she lose belows, does she not lose belows? So now, since the halacha was not decided in accordance with either opinion, tafsa lo mafkina la, lo tafsa lo yahavina la. So Rabbeinu very interesting. If she grabbed belows, if she took possession of it, we won't extract it from her. But if she didn't take it, we won't what? We won't give it to her. So we'll say, by the way, you find this in a lot of situations in halacha where there's a machlokes, specifically regarding monetary law. That sometimes if we're not sure someone is entitled to payment, someone's not entitled to a payment, we won't give them money. But if they seized it, we won't go ahead and extract it from them either. See, interestingly enough, if this lady is a moredes and she knows the Gemara, if she grabs up her belows right before she loses her ksuva, we're not going to extract it from her. On the other hand, if she didn't take it and now she becomes a moredes, we're also not giving it to her. Very interesting halacha. So the Gemara says, "Umishayina la shreisa yarche shas agit." And I will say there's an interesting postscript. The Gemara says over here, and by the way, we wait 12 months. We wait 12 months before we give her a get. Why do we wait 12 months before giving her a get? We try to see, Rashi says over here, shreisa yarche shasa. Maybe she'll change her approach. So I just want to point out over here, it appears that Chazal really heavily favored the prolonged incremental approach because it gives us time to work on the marriage. Obviously, Chazal had a vested interest when a marriage could be saved, save the marriage. Sometimes it can't, so divorce is the only option. But if the marriage can be saved, let's try that. So here, Abba said the Gemara seems to be saying, we're going to give this 12 months. We're giving this 1 year to try to figure out if we can fix it. But I will say during those 12 months, lesla mezonim ibal. Ultimately, again, he has no support obligation towards her. So we'll say this is an interesting mechanism for conflict resolution as well. See, what's the problem with giving a year to resolve conflict? What's the problem? That's a long time. So most people, if they know they have a year to resolve anything, what's going to happen? Right? They'll generally wait till the 10th month, right? So I'll say, so it's interesting idea over here about conflict resolution is conflict gets resolved when there's some level of discomfort. That's how things get resolved, right? In other words, if everyone's comfortable, generally problems, or at least there's some level of comfort, problems remain. If there's some element of discomfort, that's usually the motivation. So the Gemara says, we're going to give it 12 months. By the way, during the 12 months, she doesn't get mizonos. And I both say, I want to point out, that's uncomfortable for her, and it's also uncomfortable for him. You might say, how's it uncomfortable for him? He's saving all of his money. I would say, being a husband who's not supporting his wife, and being in a dysfunctional marriage where it's clear you're not giving your wife mizonos and there's no intimacy, that's not good for anyone involved. There's a heightened level of discomfort for everyone. So Lamaisa, it seems to be Chazal understood Rabbi say, as much as Rabbeinu said, no, prolonged conflict resolution never works. Give people 4-week window, deadline, they'll get it done. However, when it comes to Shalom Bayis, if we could save a marriage, we certainly would like to do that. So we'd like to give a longer, a more protracted window, 12 months, but you have to create an element of discomfort. I'll say, by the way, it's also an incredible yisod in chinuch, in how we educate our children. If you want children to go ahead and affect change within themselves, you have to create some level of discomfort for them. Now, let me clarify this, right? So let's say, what it means is, for example, a child does something wrong. So parents, they'll give mussar, they'll this. If there aren't consequences, right? So if the kid does something wrong, if you don't take away privileges, so why should the kid change? Why should the child do anything differently if there's no discomfort for negative behavior? That's just the way, it's just a simple Pavlovian response, right? In other words, when you ring the bell, you come eat the food. In other words, if there's no discomfort, Why should I do anything differently? And sometimes we don't realize this because we love our children very much. We want them to correct certain things, but we don't realize that unless there is a repercussion and a ramification and some level of quote unquote discomfort, people never affect change unless there is discomfort. Such an incredible use of the Gemara is teaching us. Amrav Tuli Bar Kisna, Amr Shmuel. Kosvin Igeres Mered Ala Rusa. This is interesting. We write an Igeres Mered. So we'll say this is a document of rebellion. Now you don't frame this and put this on your wall next to the Kesuva, right? But Lamaisa. So what this is we'll say, in other words, we're making this process like very formal. So ala rusa and kosin igeres mered al shomeres yavam. So this is actually interesting halacha. We'll write the document of rebellion against an arusa, but not against a shomeres yavam. Okay, so the Gemara says as follows. What's the pshat over here? So the Gemara says as follows: Meisvei achas liarusa uneso vafilu nida vafilu chola vafilu shomeres yavam. Yet so we learned before that what? Any woman could become a moredes, right? Whether she's an arusa, an asua, a nida, a chola, and even a shomeres yavam. So I will say, so there's a contradiction. We just said before that we don't write a document of mered for a shomeres yavam, and here the Gemara is quoting from the Mishnah that even a shomeres yavam could become moredes. Lokasha kanshe tavahu kanshe tavahi. Very interesting. I will say, one is talking about a case where ultimately again he. Right, man, we'll call him again. Rachel's married to Reuven. Reuven dies without children. Reuven left the brother Shimon. So I'll say, when could Rachel become moredes? When Shimon says, I want to do Yibum. Now both say, now what would be the case of moredes by Yibum? What's the case? The case is where she says, I want to marry you. I just want to marry you yet. So why don't you marry? Because I want to make things difficult for you. So that would be the case of a moredes by a shomeres yavam. So we'll say ultimately the Gemara says as follows: when ultimately again does a shomeres yavam become a moredes? When he, the yavam, Shimon, is one who is looking to do yibum. When does she not become a moredes? Ultimately again, when she wants to do yibum and he is not yet ready to do so. Okay, we'll discuss why that is. Damrav Tachliva Ravimi Amr Shmuel Tavahu Niskakin Lo. Halacha l'maisa. If Shimon, the yavam, says it's time to do yibum and she refuses, right? She's a moredes. Ultimately, again, the halacha will step in to assist him. So tavahi, however, again, if Rachel says I want to do yibum and Shimon the yavam does not want to do so, einis kakin the halacha does not intervene in that particular situation. Look at Rashi. Einis kakin Rashi says lichtov la igeres merit lahosiv aksuvasa. So we're going to see why this is. Why this seems to be one-sided. Why does halacha intervene for the yavam but not for the yavama? So let's analyze. So we'll say, how are we setting up this case of Shmuel? How are we setting this up? So the Gemara says, remember again, the case of Shmuel was that halacha l'maisa, we write in a geres mered for an arusa, but not for a shomeres yavam. What's the case where we don't write in igeres mered for a shomeres yavam? B'shetabahi. Ultimately, again, where she, Rachel, the yavama, is petitioning the yavam to get married. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, haikosin igeres mered al arusa la arusa mibai. So if this case is talking about the woman, it shouldn't say kosvin igeres mered al arusa. It should be la arusa. If we're talking about the woman, to which the Gemara says, halo kasha tani la arusa. Right? Change the version. So ma'ishna shomeres yavam klo. So we'll say in general, why is it that we would be writing an igeres mered for an arusa, right, but not for a shomeres yavam? Why not? To which the Gemara says, or say in general, why is it that halacha l'maisa will write an igeres mered when the yavam, right, Shimon, the surviving brother, when he wants to do yibum and Rachel refuses? We'll say, by the way, this is not that she refuses because she doesn't want to marry the guy. This is like we said before. Remember again, mered. Moredes is a case of where she says, no, I'm interested in the marriage. I just have a vested interest in making him miserable as well. So we'll say, so again, halacha l'maisa, the Gemara says, so why is it in a case where she wants to do yibum? Ultimately, there is no igeres mered, but when he wants to do yibum, there is. To which the Gemara says, very simple. So the Gemara says, Damrina la, zeal lo mifkadas, because we say to her, listen, you are not mechuyaves in perivarivya. A woman does not have an obligation in procreation. So because of that, we say to her, listen, if he doesn't want to marry you, just move on. Just move on, right? And marry someone else. To obviously, again, with it's going to require chalitza. So the Gemara says, Zia Lam of Kalas Arusa. The Gemara says Arusa Nami. But what about Arusa as well? If that's the case, and Arusa also is not chayeves in Peri Verivia. So Arusa Nami Nema Zil Lo Mifkedas Ella. So we'll say first white line Ella Beba Machmas Taina. So we'll say again, what's the case? What's the case where the woman is coming along? So we'll say we're trying to figure out over here as follows. Why is it? Let's go back for just a moment. Shmuel's statement. We'll write an Igeres Mered for an Arusa. Now, both say the case of Arusa, just because now we're talking about the way we frame the cases, we're talking about the women in this case. So in the case, actually, let's work backwards. Shomeres Yavam. So we're not going to write an Igeres Mered for Shomeres Yavam. How do we define that case? Rachel, the widow, wants to go ahead and do Yibam with her brother-in-law, Shimon, right? She comes along and she says, let's go. Let's go. And he says, not yet. In that case, we will not write an Igeres Mered for her. Conversely, Rachel's getting married. She's an Arusa. She's like, let's go. Let's get married. And her husband, Ruvain, says, no, not yet. In that case, we will write an Igeres Mered for her. So Gemara says, why the distinction? So very simple. In the case of the Yavama, we say to her, listen, you don't have the chiyuv of perveriv, of procreation. Your brother-in-law doesn't want to marry you. Fine. Go marry someone else. I think Gemara says, why don't you say the same thing to the Arusa? All right? Say to the Arusa, listen, your husband doesn't want to do Nisuin. Fine. Go. You're not charged with Peri Verivia. Go marry someone else. To which the Gemara says, even though a woman is not charged with Peri Verivia, so the Gemara says the first wide line, Ella beba machmas taina. She's coming with a claim. What's her claim? Da amra ba'ino chutra liyada umar lekvura. She says, I need a staff for my hand and a shovel for my burial. Also, we've seen this concept before that Allah even though a woman may not be obligated in Peri Verivia, she has a vested interest in having children. Besides the actualization or fulfillment of an innate maternal instinct, ultimately, again, a woman also wants children. Why? Because children take care of you in your old age. So that's the hope. And here's Hashem, right? So she says, I need someone to take. In other words, children are my long-term care policy, right? So Lamaisa, again, I need someone, right? So therefore, I have a vested interest in getting married and having children. Even though I don't have Mr. Peri Verivia, that's the claim. And therefore, in the case of Arusa, Halach Lamaisa, we will go ahead and write for her an Igeres Mered if her husband doesn't want to marry her. So I don't say, you can say something by the Shomeres Yavam. Right? Rachel could say the same thing. I'm ready to do Yibam, even though I have no mitzvah Peri Verivia. Why? I want to have kids. Why do I want to have kids? Because again, they're my long-term care policy. To which the Gemara says, Ella idi v'idi shetavahu. Rather, we'll say, what's the halacha? What's the halacha? Idi v'idi shetavahu. We're talking about both cases where ultimately, again, he is the one who is making the claim to get married. V'lo kasha, kan lachlos v'kan liyavim. Oh, so we'll say, let's go back. Remember, how did this whole thing start? This whole thing started because we had a stira, right? We had a contradiction. We had a contradiction ultimately, again, in two sources. First source says that we do not go ahead and write an Igeres Mered, right? We do not write a document of rebellion for a Shomeres Yavam, right? In a Yibam situation. And Bryson Mishnah number 2 said, we do. So how do we resolve it? So the Gemara says, new resolution. So the Gemara says, Ella idi v'idi shetavahu. Both cases are both saying where the man, right, the Yavam, in this case, we'll call him Shimon, is saying to Rachel, let's get married and let's do Yibum, and she is refusing. Now we'll say, once again, she's refusing that because she wants to marry him. She's refusing because she wants to cause pain and suffering. V'lo kasha. So we'll say, how do you reconcile? Listen to this. Kan lachlos v'kan liyabim. Oh, I will say, watch this. One is where he's coming along and saying, I want to do chalitza. I will say, if he wants to do chalitza, well, one is saying when he wants to do chalitza, and the other is saying ultimately again that he wants to do yibum. The Gemara says, "The Amar Rabbi Padas, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Tava lachlotz niskakin lo." When the yavam wants to do chalitza, that's when the Beis Din intervenes on his behalf. And interestingly enough, if she refuses to do chalitza, we will label her a moredes. Tava liyabim, fascinating, totally counterintuitive to what you were, right? Tava liyabim. If, however, Shimon, the survivor, wants to do Yibum, ein niskakin lo, we do not go ahead and involve ourselves in this case. We'll say this is the famous Rebbe Pedas from Yevamis. Maishna liyabim delo. Why is it, I will say, that at the end of the day, if he wants to do yibum, we don't get involved in label or mera? That's the law. I'm reading the Gemara's the law. Tamrina le zil benasav isasachrisa. Because you say to Shimon, listen, go marry someone else. Go marry someone else. Don't marry this woman. So the Gemara says, lachlot nami lema le zil nasav isasachrisi. Why don't I say the same thing by chalitza as well? Ella, I will say, here we go. The amar kevan da agida bi lo kaya. Because remember again, even if Rachel refuses to go ahead and do chalitza with Shimon, does that preclude him from getting married to someone else? No, because remember, we're operating with a model where technically a man can marry more than one wife. So because he has a recalcitrant chalutza, right, at the end of the day, that doesn't damage his ability that doesn't impair his ability to get. So we just say, listen, go get married. Go get married to someone else. To which the Gemara says, no. If she doesn't want to do chalitza, Ella, damar kevan da agida bi lo kayavu li achrisei. Hachanami kevan da agida bi lo kayavu achrisi. So also listen to this. So the Gemara says like this, no, it's not true. Because Shimon says, listen, do you know what it does to me with the shadchanim when I have an outstanding shomeres yavam, right? No one wants to go out with the guy who has an outstanding shomeres yavam. Which we'll say makes sense. In other words, if you have unresolved yibum business, that is a relationship red flag. So it makes you say, even though technically speaking, I can go ahead and marry another woman, it's going to impair me that this relationship is not resolved. The Gemara wants to say the same thing over here. Here we go. So we'll say, here we go. Both cases, I will say. So therefore, let's go back. Which remember, I will say we have a very simple Gemara. We're trying to just resolve. First source said we do not write any geres mered for yibum, for a shomeres yavam. Second source said we do. We're just trying to resolve what that means. To which the Gemara says, you're right. Here we go. We'll say both cases are talking about where Shimon, the surviving brother, tells Rachel, I want to do yibum. V'lo kasha, kan b'mishnah rishona, kan b'mishnah achrona. So we'll say, again, the two Mishnayos reflect the two different stages of the halacha. We'll say, how so? Listen to this. Here we go. This nan. We'll say back to Yevamos days. We quoted this Rabbi Pedas so many times. Mitzvahs yibum kodemes lemis. The Gemara says, listen to this. It's nan. Mitzvahs yibum kodemes lemis chalitza. Barishon l'shem miskabim l'shem mitzvah. We'll say in the beginning, so the mitzvah of yibum was better than the mitzvah of chalitza, right? Yibum was preferable, right? Because after all, yibum is the mitzvah. Yibum is the mitzvah for the surviving brother to marry the widow. Why? Because people had the right kavanas when going ahead and performing the mitzvah of yibum. Achshov, shein miskavna mitzvah. But now, when yibum is preferred, that people often don't have the right kavanah for mitzvahs. And I will say, by the way, the subtext of this is Rabbi Pedas. What did Rabbi Pedas say? That if a yavam marries his yavama, his sister-in-law, for any reason other than the mitzvah, let's say he marries her because he finds her attractive. He marries her because she has money. He marries her because she's a balas chas, whatever it is. Any other reason other than the mitzvah, Rabbi Pedas said, bi'ilas nos. Such a strong. So we'll say, remember again. So therefore, achshav shein miskabel l'shum mitzvah amru mitzvahs chalitza kodemes lemitzvahs yibum. But we'll say now that halacha l'maisa that people don't do things for the right reasons, weren't doing yibum for the right reasons. Ultimately, again, halacha l'maisa we say that the mitzvah of chalitza takes precedence over yibum. Therefore, I will say when the first Mishnah said that we do not go ahead and write any geres mered in the case of yibum, that's reflecting the later iteration of the halacha. That we don't want people to do yibum, we actually prefer people to do chalitza. The second source that the Gemara quoted that says we do write any geres mered that was in the original halacha, where ultimately again yibum was the preferred mechanism. So I will say, I'll tell you something amazing. There is a magnificent Imre Emes. The Ger Rebbe says like this. So I will say, this is really a fascinating idea. So in the second iteration of this halacha, Chazal essentially said that since a person doesn't have the right kavanas, right, now, contemporarily, that people don't have kavana for the mitzvah, therefore what? Mitzvahs chalitza kodemes. You do chalitza. So the Imre Emes says like this. I'm just going to quote this to you. He says, Kasha, I don't understand. De'eich yomar lo chafatzti lekachta, halo be'emes chafetzu, ela shabezdin monim oso, v'nimtza omer sheker. They will say, listen to this kasha. So let's just play this out. Reuven's married to Rachel. Reuven dies without children. Reuven has a surviving brother. Shimon. Right? Shimon shows up in Beis Din. And what does Shimon say? Shimon says, I want to do Yibam with Rachel. I want to do Yibam with Rachel. What does Beis Din tell him? No. What are you doing? What are you going to do? You're going to do Chalitza. You're going to do Chalitza. And Akshav now Beis Din do Chalitza. I will say, what's the verbiage? What's the wording that's used when a man does Chalitza? Lo chafatzti lekachta. I don't want to take her as a wife. Ask the Imre Emes. Shimon is going to stand in Beis Din and he's going to say, Lo chafatzti lekachta. I don't want to take. He just said to us 2 minutes ago, he wants to marry her. And Beis Din said, no, we're not letting you. Imre Emes says, how can you say something? How could Shimon say? How could we let Shimon say something that is clearly false? We'll say, get ready for this. V'yesh lomar sha'akavana hi ala nefesh shehi maskemes l'gzeres chachamim. Now let's say, where can you find my true expression of intent? My true expression of intent is not what I say with my lips, but it's what I want in my soul. And I will say, what does the neshama of a yid want? The neshama of a yid only wants one thing, which is to do the right thing and to live in conformance with halacha. And in this case, halacha tells Shimon, you have to go ahead and do chalitza, not yibum. He goes on, he says, so we'll say, so again, therefore says the Imre Emes so beautifully, that when he says, lo chafatzti lekachta, I will say, what's my real chayfetz? If you ask me, what do I really want in life? So the truth is, what I really want is what my neshama wants. Now, that doesn't mean that that's always the way I behave, and that's always the way I act, and those are always the things I go after. But if you ask me at a core level, what do I want out of life? I want the things that are going to make my neshama happy. I want the things that are going to make my neshama feel fulfilled. That's what I want. And therefore, even though Shimon just said, I want to marry Rachel, no, you don't. That's what your lips are saying. But your neshama is saying, I want to do whatever is in conformance with halacha because I want to live my life in total compliance with the Ratzon Habori, with the will of Hashem. That's the desire of a Jew. He goes on and he quotes the Rambam over here who says, listen to this, it was a beautiful Rambam, Shekol ish Yisrael rotze lasos kol mitzvos u'litzrachim min averos. Every single Jew wants to do the mitzvahs and wants to distance himself from averos. Elo, sheyitzro tokfo. But sometimes my Yetzer Hara hijacks the bus, right? My Yetzer Hara just hijacks everything. Goes on. So we'll say, isn't that a beautiful idea? So therefore, even though Shimon himself just said, I want to marry her, it's not a contradiction to say, because at the end of the day, what I really want out of life is what my neshama wants. So beautiful. The Gemara goes weiter. So admasei epoches. So we'll say, so again, remember, now let's get into the amounts of diminution. So remember again, I will say, the Mishnah said that Allah, two opinions in the Mishnah. First opinion in the Mishnah said, Rabbi Huda said the Tanakhama said 7 dinar in a week. Rabbi Huda says 7 trapikin. So it says the Gemara, let's analyze. So the Gemara says, my trapikin, what are trapikin? Or Sheshes? Astira. Great, very helpful. What's an astira? My astira, palga de zuz, half a zuz. Taina Rabbi Huda, Omer Shlosha trapikin, shein teshan ma'in, mea v'chatzi l'chol yom. So we'll say Rabbi Huda says, it's ultimately again 3 trapikin that are 9 ma'in, 1.5 ma'a per day. That's the amount that the diminution comes out. So we'll say, here's what's interesting. If you notice, by the way, the diminution amounts and the addition amounts are not the same. Right? Ultimately, it seems to be more is diminished than is added. So the Gemara says, I don't understand, if mored and moredes are the same, then why are the values different? So we'll say, if you do the math, essentially what the Gemara says is, pretty much we add onto the ksuva at a rate of 6 days a week. We diminish from the ksuva at a rate of 7 days a week. So why is it that the diminution, Shabbos is not included in the diminution, Shabbos is included in the diminution, but is not included in the addition? To which the Gemara says, very simple, Ihi de mafchis kapachis lo mechse kischar Shabbos. Because Rabbi say by her, where we're diminishing her ksuva, even if we diminish a portion on Shabbos, it doesn't look like there's any Shabbos wages being incurred. Ihu to asufi kamasufi abenbeis mechse kischar Shabbos. Rabbi say this is very interesting, but he ultimately again. Yankee, did you just look at your watch when I turned the daf? I saw that. And so ultimately again, but he who ultimately again we add on. Sorry, when he's the mored, that we add onto the ksuva, ultimately that looks like schar Shabbos. So we'll say it's actually very interesting. The concern is, since the way we penalize him when he is a mored is that we add onto the ksuva, if there is a Shabbos allocation amount, it looks like schar Shabbos, looks like Shabbos earnings, and that accounts for the differential. So we'll say ultimately, so now we'll say the Gemara asks an interesting question. Why is there a distinction in the amounts? As we'll say, at the end of the day, we said halachically, ultimately again, a mored and a moredes are the same. In other words, whether it's the man who rebels against his wife or the wife who rebels against her husband, ultimately again, the involvement in halacha and the penalty is, yet the financial penalty is not. So how do you account for the discrepancy? So I'll say, so of course, I want to point out, the Gemara just answered, well, one of the discrepancies is Shabbos, right? Diminution versus addition. And I will say that's very easily resolvable. How is it easily resolvable? Just go ahead and add more, right, to his addition during the week. In other words, so obviously Chazal felt that there should be a difference in the amounts. Why is there a difference in the amounts? It's fascinating. We'll say, so the Gemara says, Amrlei, say ulaman mishuk shal zonos. We'll say, this is incredible. Go out and learn from the red light district, right? From the harlot marketplace. Mi socher es mi. Who hires who? So we'll say the reality is, apparently, clinical tests have shown that there are many more men that hire women than women who hire men, which indicate, the Gemara says, that men have a much greater need for ongoing intimacy than women do. And therefore, again, the withholding of intimacy from the marriage is much more detrimental or painful for the man. Furthermore, the Gemara says, Davar achar, zeh yitzra mi bachutz, v'zeh yitzra mi bifnim. So it's very interesting. The Gemara says, furthermore, even if a woman is desirous, so ultimately, again, her desire is contained internally. If a man becomes desirous, ultimately, again, he could have a physical reaction of arousal, and that can be embarrassing for him, ultimately, again, if he doesn't have a way to satisfy that desire. So we'll say, this is actually quite interesting. So the Gemara understands over here that halacha l'maisa, there's a difference. There's a difference for men and for women with their need for ongoing intimacy. So because for the case of the man, the case of moredes, is something that's, we'll call it just more painful or more uncomfortable for him on an ongoing basis. Therefore, again, the amount that is deducted from the ksuva is greater than the amount that is added to the ksuva. Good, very interesting. Says the Mishnah. I have nothing additional to say on that. So the Mishnah says as follows: Hamashras ishto ayidei shlish. So we'll say, here we go. Another interesting case. These cases are fascinating. A man supports his wife through a third party. Okay, how exactly is that working? Look what the Mishnah says. Hamashras ishto ayidei shlish. Rashi says, Shenosin lamazonoseh bebeis apotropos ve'inu miskalgelas imo. So we'll say, here's the case. Reuven is married to Rachel. Rachel lives in a separate house. Okay, and Rachel is therefore supported, and Reuven puts money with an apotropos, with someone who's responsible for Rachel's support. So she lives in a house, and again, he's fully supporting her, but they're living separately. So that's how Mashras as Ishtay de Shalish Lo Yivchos Lo Mishnei. So I'll say, how much do you have to support her with? How much do you have to support her with? It's quite interesting. So the Gemara says, by the way, I will say, just very quickly, I will say that there is something, well, no, let's go. Just on the concept of Yitzro mi bachutz versus Yitzro mi bifnim is a very profound yisod as well. When the Gemara says that a man Yitzro mi bachutz, I will say there's such a, think about those words, that apply, right? That applies to each of us, right? So a man, the Yitzro is mi bachutz. I will say those are the most beautiful words in the world. Why? Because I'll say what that tells me is sometimes we think that the negative things we want and the negative things we do are part and parcel of who we are. But it's not true. Yitzro mi bachutz. I will say at the end of the day, who I am, you want to know who I am? Like we just saw before by the Imre Emes. Who am I? I'm a neshama. And I want to do the right things. But sometimes I have a yetzer that derails me. But that yetzer is not me. That yetzer is not me. That yetzer is mi bachutz. That yetzer is outside of me. Yeah, it exerts a lot of control over me, and it derails a lot of stuff in life, but it is not part and parcel of who I am. Yitzri mi bachutz. My yetzer is on the outside. Okay, but we don't have time to get into it, so we'll go back there. Says the Gemara. So we'll say, how much support? But we'll say, but just hold on to that for Elul, because there's nothing more profound. Sometimes the reason we don't do tshuva is because we just feel like we're such damaged goods. And Chazal tell us, you're not damaged, you're perfect. I have Yetzirah, that's fine, that's not you. That's not you. That's Yitzro mi bachutz. So how much support do you have to give her? Says the Gemara, mishtei kabin chitin. You can't give her less than 2 kab of wheat, or arba kabin seorin, or 4 kab of barley. Rabbi Yossi, lo pasek la seorin, Rabbi Shosha yisamach la edom. So Rabbi Yossi says, nah, no one gives her, no one talk about barley except Rabbi Shmuel, who lived next to Edom. What that means, we'll see in the Gemara. V'nosei lo chatzi kav kitnis. You have to give her a half a kav of legumes. The chatzi lug shemen, a half a lug of oil. The kav grogros, a kav of dried figs. O mana devela, or a mana of cake of pressed figs. V'mei lo. So we'll say, what happens if he doesn't have these items? Posek leumasan peres u'makam. So we'll say you have to give her produce or goods of like quality and quantity. Good. I will say the idea over here is the mission. I will say you have to understand, like this is such a profound idea in securing the rights of the woman. I will say, remember again, from the mission's perspective, a woman had security in one of 2 ways: she was married or she was in her father's home. Here, what the mission is spelling out is explicitly that a husband has to support his wife with all of these items. Am I spelling it out? See, I will say the problem with just saying support could be very subjective. By spelling this out, this creates objective metrics of support. So he gives her a bed. I will say mapatz is a soft mat, machatzelis is a harder mat. He has to give her literally a keep of her head, a tichel, a sheitel, right? He has to give her a tichel or a sheitel. So the Gemara says a belt, and I will say you have to buy her shoes. How often is a husband obligated to buy his wife shoes? Mimoed lemoed. I will say, take notes on this. You just need to get new shoes for the 3 regalim. I would not float this one, right? This is not going to, and if you do, I'm just quoting the Mishnah. I'm not espousing an opinion. I will say, furthermore, you have to buy new clothing once a year. Wow. New clothing once a year. I was saying that new clothing should be substantive clothing that's worth 50 zuz. Ve'enosnin lo chadashim mimos. I will say you don't give a woman new clothing during the summer. New clothing was thicker. So you don't give her new clothing during the summer because ultimately, again, that's going to be too hot. Nor do you give her worn out clothing during the rainy season. Listen to this. Here's how clothing used to work in times of the Mishnah. I'll say a husband is obligated to buy his wife new clothing during the winter. And good, like substantive clothing, right? 50 zuz clothing. So you give her 50 zuz clothing during the winter. Now that's the clothing she wears through the summer. Just the difference is by the time she gets to the summer, it's already worn out. It's really broken in enough that it's considered to be thin clothing. Incredible. And I will say worn out clothing. Let's say again the next season when she gets new clothing, she gets to keep the worn out clothing for herself. No sin la ma'a kesef l'tzarcha. Furthermore, again, he's obligated to give her a ma'a of money for her needs each and every week. And I will say, even if the husband and wife for some reason are not living together during the week, ultimately, again, he must eat with her on Shabbos. Right? In other words, he must eat with her at least once a week. And if he doesn't give her, ultimately, again, the not spending money, what's the word? There's a word for it. Petty cash, right? Petty cash, right? He doesn't give her just the need for just money around the house. Ultimately, again, then she keeps her earnings. Umahi osalo. So we'll say, so again, we've referenced this idea about a wife doing work in the home. So what's the work? What's the work that she's obligated to do? So the Gemara says, so mahi osalo, mishkal chamish slaim shesi b'Yehuda. She does 5 slaim worth of warp thread in Yehuda. Shein eser slaim begalil. That's ultimately 10 slaim in the Galil. O mishkal eser slaim arev b'Yehuda. Or the worth or the weight of 10 slaim of weft thread in Yehuda. Shim esrim slaim begalil. Fine. And if she was nursing, we diminish the amount of earnings she has to bring in. And we add on to the amount of food that the husband is obligated to give her. When say, when is all of this so? We'll say this is only true. These are the floor amounts. Everything mentioned in the Mishnah is a floor, is a minimum. However, mechubad hakolafi kavodo. Rabbi say by mechubad, someone who has money. Ultimately, again, I will say this goes back to the kushta, right? Right? I'll support you in comfort if there is money. Ultimately, again, a husband is obligated to support his wife in accordance with the wealth and the means he has at his disposal. Rabbi say, shkoyach. We'll stop here. All of this is weekly, except clothing and shoes. Except clothing and shoes. Amen. All right, Chabrazim, have a great day, everyone. Good to see everyone. Ringo, Richard, Michael. Ringo. Sure, thank you. Thank you. Okay. Good morning.